Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today. Thank you for being here in this gorgeous day. So I'm a political scientist by training, whatever that means, really. But when I first started working in politics, what I heard the most was the phrase, "Pia, you're crazy." And what's really interesting about it is not that it was my mom who would constantly say, "You are crazy," which she did all the time. But the reason why people were telling me that I was losing my mind doing this, it was because no one cares. Why are you going to get involved in politics if no one really cares about it? No one engages, no one participates. Everyone's, apathetic. And so I always thought, and it's always in the back of my mind, if we are really citizens that are not engaged, not interested, or it's the system that we have that produces this apathy in us, in society. So let's have a look at the system a little bit more. As 2016 comes to an end, I probably don't have to tell this room how internet has completely transformed many aspects of our lives, how culture and producing cultural goods and the arts has been democratized, how the costs of starting up a company or project are lower than ever before, how 3D printing is making a revolution in prosthetics, how education has been completely transformed. We can now educate ourselves in universities around the world that we might never even set foot at. But there is one space that is still lagging behind in this revolution, and that's our political system. I think it's time that we bring the political system, our political institutions, to the 21st century. Because this is what we're facing right now, pretty much, right? So our political institutions are not designed in the void, in a vacuum. They respond to certain, to certain values, to a certain socio-economic context, to a certain technology of a time. And so we are now citizens that are transformed in many aspects of our lives by a new technology, by the internet, by new ways of communicating, of being able to voice our concerns, to be activists in our own spaces. And we are confronted constantly by a political system that it was a system, the best possible system designed with this technology, with the technology that we had at the time. So I come from a group of people who we've been working for the past 5 years in trying to convince existing political forces and decision-taking actors that they can change the way they make decisions. I talked a lot about how we can rewire the existing political system. And now, after 5 years, the phrase that I sort of most think of is this one by Bucky Fuller that says that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. What you need to do is to build another model that renders the existing model obsolete. So after 5 years of battling the political corporation, to say it in a not so nice way, but the agenda that I'm trying to push today is to get us to think how we can build an alternative governance system that allows this existing model to lose its preponderance. And this entails thinking about the internet as a political jurisdiction. So now that most of you agree with my mom, probably by this stage, can't blame you for that, guys. Let me unpack what this means a little bit. How are we organized now as citizens, more and more? We are organized in what we called open collectives, right? We are plugged into this peer-to-peer network, that's the internet, where the cost of sending a message is the same as the cost of receiving a message for the first time in history. So while we are increasingly organized in these distributed networks around the world, we are still confronted with the same political institutions that we had before. And asking these networks, these collectives, to have a conversation about of organizing in a hierarchical way, in the same way our political institutions are now organized, it's like asking who's the president of the internet, right? It's the same kind of out of syncness. So let me just bring this down a little bit. Let's unpack this a little bit more. This is the Occupy movement. Occupy movement is a network of individuals that is extremely flat, right, and peer-to-peer. So this doesn't mean that it's a leaderless kind of soup, right, without any kind of leaders. It just means that the leadership, the way this network is organized, it's extremely flat, and leadership is emerging, and it's dynamic, and it's fluid. Another example is unions. So the current system that we have is forcing our workers to be organized in these silos that are governments, while at the same time they're confronted with companies that are completely transnational and algorithmic, right? So you can order an Uber and it's the same interface whether you're here, whether you're in Canada, whether you're in India. It's exactly the same interface, it's just one company, one algorithm. But the other side, the people, the drivers, they're still forced to be in these sort of silos that each government it's creating. So this is, again, this is all bringing a lot of noise into the system because we are talking at two different levels, right? So on the one hand, we have big organizations, big algorithmic companies, the internet, large networks. But on the other hand, we are forced to, boom, be organized in the same way that we've been organizing for the past 250 years. And that produces a lot of noise in the system. This is Gonza. This is a friend of mine with whom we funded a political party called the Net Party in Argentina. And this is us trying to organize 18,000 paper signatures alphabetically, one by one, because that's what the government required of us for us to have a political party. No, seriously, it was painful, very, very painful. Again, our political system is designed to push as many people out of the system as possible by design, right? And at the same time, it's confronted with we as citizens organizing in a completely new way, having capabilities that we've never had before. And this brings a lot of noise in the system. So what I'd like to propose is for us to think how we can build what I call the browser on top of governments. So bringing the political space into the 21st century requires that we kind of shift gears a little bit and stop thinking of the nation state as the only political unity. Started thinking about the internet as a jurisdiction implies thinking that there's another level where we can start that also makes us citizens of a different jurisdiction. And just to give you an example of how this can sort of bring it back to a more concrete example, this is Brussels Together. Brussels Together is a collective of people that live in Brussels, might be or not from Belgium, but they live in that city. And what they decided to do was they come together and they decided to build a collective for the city. And they are starting to fund projects whose objective is to make the life in Brussels better without going through the government channels. So a city, in essence, is a collective. Adelaide is a collective of individuals that what they do is they extract money from the citizens via taxes and then redistribute it in the forms of subsidies, it is one model, right? But a different model is saying, why don't we organize as citizens? We all start putting $10, $20 per month, and we start pulling money, and we decide how and which projects that make the life in this city better, we decide how we spend it. We decide how we do it. So again, that's not fighting the existing system, not saying like we should change the way government allocates resources. It's like saying, you know what, let's build a different one. Let's build an alternative, and let's make both coexist. So an idea might be building an Adelaide together and start thinking about projects that make the life in this city better. So citizens around the world, and we the people, are increasingly, as I was saying, plug into these peer-to-peer networks, and we're increasingly used to representing ourselves, to be able to voice our concerns. But our representatives average between 0.0003% and 0.001% of the voting population. In the 21st century, that completely blows my mind. It seems like not a lot, right? It seems like we can do better than this. So what happens with this? What do we do as citizens? We essentially, the political system that we have, essentially is asking us to outsource our citizenship, our decision making, on a group of professional citizens that are called representatives for a fixed period of time, rather long, 4 years or 6 years in some places, and for all topics. Right? What we do is we vote for someone and we give them the right to decide in our name for all topics, and only based on the territory that we happen to be living in. Just because we were born somewhere or we're living somewhere. So the territorial basis for power and for sovereignty is what I'm trying to question here today. And so this produces, yes, a lot of noise in the system. This produces people taking on the streets around the world and in countries that they have vote. It's not like they can't vote, but that the only input that we give to the political system in the 21st century is voting once every 4 years. Just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's like sending, like an emoji. That's our only, that's a sad one, probably. That's our only input, right? That's the only thing we interact with. And so that is extremely poor. And so try to contrast that with, again, how we are able, everything that we are now able to do with technology. And that sort of, that out of sync is what is bringing this democracy not found. And so how's the political system responding? Our political system cannot longer represent us. They're doing a very poor job at doing it. And so when they realize that they're unable to respond to the demands of a society that it's changing and it's getting more and more complex and more integrated, and problems that are global problems, they're not just country problems, what they do, or what they've been doing lately, is they've been throwing the ball to the citizens in, like in a referendum, are calling it a democracy. We've seen it in Brexit, and we see the consequences of that, right? The UK government was absolutely unable to respond to the demands of its citizens. So they decided to gamble power, right? Organize a referendum, and they lost. And they call it democracy. Well, referendums are not democracy. The way these referendums are organized are not better and more sophisticated democracy. And the problem, so the question here is, it's about trust, right? So how we are trusting political parties, parliaments, the media, it's at sort of historical lows. It's unbelievable. And the problem that I have with this, and what keeps me up at night, although the bets are still out there if it's my daughter or this that keeps me up at night that much, I'm not sure yet. Is if we do not trust our existing political institutions, we don't trust political parties, we don't trust the parliament, we don't trust media or the justice, who do we trust? Right, because the problem is that power completely abhors vacuum. Empty spaces in power, in politics, never remain empty. They're always going to get filled up by either groups that are more organized or more radicalized, or the demagogue of the day, the Trumps of the world. So if we do not trust existing institutions and we keep undermining our political system, our government, but we do not propose an alternative, we are going to be in trouble. Because political vacuum never stays empty. So the question is, all right, fair enough, if we do not trust them, who do we trust ourselves? When we did the Net Party and Democracy, so the Net Party is a political party that I helped co-found it. And we ran for elections with this idea. We built a software called Democracy OS. It's a decision-making platform. And we ran for elections with saying that we were always going to vote in Congress, not according to what we wanted as representatives, but according to what citizens decided on this online platform. So for Argentina, this is pretty radical. Trust me. And so the question that I heard the most when I say this thing is like, about what? Are people going to decide? Are they going to participate? Are they going to vote? It's like we do not trust we as citizens to be able to make decisions. And that makes sense. Why? Because we've heard always that we are not prepared to participate, that we need to give someone who's an expert our vote, because we need to outsource our citizenship on someone else. Because that's the political system that we have. It's a political system that is designed to only be concerned with the game between professional citizens. Because that's the best system that we could come up with at the time when it was designed. When education wasn't universal, when moving from one place to the other one was pretty much impossible, where the technology to communicate was really slow, it was the post. But now that changed. But we need to change with it. So it's not only changing our political institutions, it's changing how we perceived ourselves as citizens. Realizing that we can engage, but it's going to be, we need to experiment, we need to learn, we need to fail, and we need to learn again to be part of this, because we've never been. So the last big innovation that our political system made, it's called representative democracy, and that happened a while ago. And when I talk about representative, or in general, like what comes up as an alternative is direct democracy. And I think that direct democracy is a very, very bad system for government. What I'd like to propose is something much more interesting, at least in my mind, and it's called liquid democracy. Liquid democracy is a system where we can delegate power, trust, among ourselves as citizens for different topics, for different periods of time. So I can trust Gail for all matters regarding the environment. And I can trust Dan for all matters regarding healthcare. And I might trust my elected politician, my elected MP for all matters regarding the economy. Why not? It's fine. But we need to allow for emerging social leadership. We need to allow us to build trust amongst ourselves in society. And also, we don't have to give anymore the decision-making power to someone for really long periods of time. So for example, I can say, I'd like to receive delegations for macroeconomics, but because I know that making reforms at a macroeconomic level takes a long time to see the results, I'm only going to receive delegations if you trust me with your vote for 5 years. Or on the contrary, I can say, like, I'm going to delegate on you my vote regarding healthcare, but I know a little bit about it. I'm very concerned about the space, so I'm only going to do it if you let me enough time for me to review your decision. And if I don't agree, then I vote myself. We can do that. The technology for doing this exists. And it's called the sorry about that. It's called, and it's the blockchain. Right? Blockchains are peer-to-peer networks that create the possibility, because this is experimental, okay? But which is great, because we need to experiment with these things. I mean, our democracies have a long time, and the type of institutions that we had, we have had a long time experimenting. So, but the blockchain creates the possibility of a decentralized organization on a scale that has never been seen before in the planet. We can now, for the first time, build a layer on top of the nation state, the browsers on top of governments, that allows us to interact at a different level. I do not understand why today I'm only represented by Argentina. Why? Why? It blows my mind, I promise. Like the fact that I can't choose someone else, that I can change nationalities, but I can't not have one, for example, or that I can't choose someone from Australia to vote in my name in, United Nations decisions or climate change talks. Why? Why is the territory still the only basis for power? That doesn't make a lot of sense, at least in my mind, sorry. So we created Democracy Earth. And Democracy Earth is an open source platform for decision making, vote delegation, and voting on top of the blockchain. We've been experimenting with it for 1 or 2 months now. We just did a pilot in Colombia. So Colombia, they just did this referendum for peace. They signed the peace agreement between the government and the guerrilla and the FARC after many years of war. And then the president decided that it was a good idea to just have a referendum. And they lost. The peace wasn't approved. And the reason the peace wasn't approved was because there was one article in the whole agreement that stated that the FARC could become a political party. And no one wanted that. So what we did was, we did a digital referendum, and we divided the agreement. Instead of having a binary yes or no referendum, that is what they did in reality. We did a digital version where we divided in 4 clauses. 3 clauses for peace got accepted by a landslide. 70% agreed, 70%, 70%. The last one that said, do you want the FARC to become a political party, lost by 70%. If they would have done something like that, today they would have signed peace. But they didn't. They used a very blunt tool because it was, again, a gamut for a power. So that's Democracy As. It's open source, it's free, anyone can use it. I encourage you to try it in any sort of organizations. And what it does is it provides 3 things that until today were the monopoly of governments. And that's, sorry, someone's not very happy with what I'm saying. The first one is identity. So until now, only either governments or corporations like Facebook, for example, are the ones that are giving identity. On the blockchain, we can have peer-to-peer identity validation using something like Blockstack, for example. We have dynamic participation. There is this liquid democracy that I've been talking about, that it's emerging sort of representation. And then you can vote. And what's really interesting is that because it's a shared ledger, everyone counts the votes. It's no longer the monopoly of the state, of the government, to certify the result of a decision. We can all do it now. The network, sort of, it's in charge of doing it. And so I love this picture. what's really, really interesting about the blockchain is that we can now have a conversation, we can have proposals, we can have voting outside of the nation state's jurisdiction. So today what happens is that, for example, and I think it's terribly, terribly unfair that people who are being hit the hardest by climate change, for example, do not have a voice in these debates because they are mediated by governments that are not democracies. We cannot let that happen. It seems very unfair today because you go to most of these places and you will probably see a hut with a little solar panel that is powering a Nokia 1000. So the technology is there. Why don't we leverage to allow for everyone to participate? Half of the world is not participating in any kind of discussion because we're allowing their voices to be mediated by non-democratic government. And we are allowing it because it's our responsibility. It's one world. Having a voice cannot be an accident of birth in this century. We cannot let that happen. So even if you disagree with everything that I just said, which is clearly an option, talk to my mom if not. If I can leave you with one idea, with one thing, it's like we are not bound to the political institutions that we inherited. We collectively own them. We can change them, we can redesign them, we can rethink, they're ours. Whether we want this type of democracy or not, whether we want to change it, whether we like representative democracy, whether we want to move to a liquid democracy, that's fine. Just as long as you know that it's up to us to make that decision. Please do not let anyone say otherwise. Government, Larry Lessig said it really well a couple of days ago. Government is local, but democracy is global. So let's do this together. Thank you.